Hi, everybody, and welcome to the third session of the State Support Team Region 8 Adolescent Literacy Series. I'm Debbie Thurl.
And I'm Tracy Mail.
We're excited that you're here with us today to talk about what to consider in adolescent vocabulary instruction. We chose this as our third topic because it is important to know what the research has to say to guide our understanding of students' vocabulary gaps and effective classroom instructional practices to address those gaps. To access a PDF of this slideshow, as well as a Google Doc with resources, please use the links below this YouTube video. Our agenda today is focused around the importance of understanding the vocabulary gaps that exist for our students. As we think about varied skills of students who step into our classrooms or virtual environments every day, it's important to be intentional in order to meet their needs through instruction. Being aware of their level of vocabulary understanding is valuable information when planning a lesson. Knowing that a vocabulary instructional strategy or program includes components that research has shown to be effective in promoting learning of terms and concepts is critical. This session will touch on these issues, and we encourage you to use an analysis tool provided to critically review current vocabulary instruction. We will refer back to the analysis tool later in the presentation, and you will be able to access it through a link. Back in 2000, the National Reading Panel came forth with a report that emphasized the importance of reading instruction, including a vocabulary component central to each lesson as necessary to support readers' comprehension. 20 years later, the research is more detailed than ever in citing the importance of explicit vocabulary instruction and its relationship to student achievement. As mentioned in our prior webinars, Ohio's Strategic Plan for Education focuses on literacy as a key strategy and educating the whole child with a focus on closing students' vocabulary gaps through the use of evidence-based practices.
As a quick review, we want to remind you that the science of reading is the body of research that defines the foundations of literacy and promotes using the simple view of reading, or SVR. In Ohio, educators teaching at all grade levels are encouraged to use the simple view of reading to drive all literacy decisions, conversations, and content, as well as the development and acquisition of resources to teach and support our learners. Scarborough's reading rope is the simple view of reading formula turned on its side, braiding and weaving together the skills that make up the two big buckets of the simple view of reading to result in skilled reading comprehension. The two big buckets are decoding at the word level and language comprehension. Simply put, it intertwines the components of the simple view of reading. Understanding the simple view of reading can help teachers assess language and literacy strengths and weaknesses and guide evidence-based instruction and intervention. Now, take a look at the slide and think about which quote defining vocabulary speaks to you. Why do you connect with that particular quote? Take a moment to stop the video to think about and discuss the vocabulary definitions. The Letters Manual in Unit 5 states that vocabulary refers to the student's knowledge of and memory for word meanings. Vocabulary is demonstrated through reading and writing, as well as oral language, listening, and speaking. Since vocabulary words must have meaning and context connections, it is not the same as decoding, since you can decode words without knowing their meanings. So just because a student can read a word correctly does not mean that they know and understand the word's meaning and use. Keep in mind that vocabulary knowledge is not something that can ever be fully mastered. It is something that expands and deepens over the course of a lifetime. We've just discussed the definitions of vocabulary. Now let's talk about the vocabulary gap depicted in the graph on this slide. The term the Matthew effect, often referenced when talking about vocabulary gap, actually refers to a line from the Gospel according to Matthew in the New Testament of the Bible. It roughly translates to mean the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. In education, this refers to the difference in the number of vocabulary words students enter school knowing and the widening gap that occurs as they progress through the grade levels. Some students enter school having had language-rich experiences, while others have had the opposite experience. Those students who enter school knowing fewer words tend to get off to a poor start in reading, and as a result, are exposed to fewer words as time goes by. Therefore, the poor get poorer in terms of vocabulary. Limited exposure to printed words results in limited opportunities to build background knowledge, understand academic language, and gain knowledge of specific word meanings. These identified vocabulary-related problems make reading more difficult. To counteract this vocabulary gap, it's critical that educators surround students with reading challenges in a knowledge-building environment as early as possible and continue this approach throughout the students' educational careers.
Author Natalie Wexler, in her book, The Knowledge Gap, focuses on a long overlooked issue lying at the heart of what is known as the achievement gap. Many students lack the background knowledge and vocabulary to read and comprehend complex texts. Wexler emphasizes the urgent need to systematically build background knowledge and vocabulary simultaneously for all students to develop the ultimate goal of reading comprehension. Dr. Anita Archer is a leading author and educational consultant on the use of the explicit vocabulary instruction process. She suggests using an explicit process to teach vocabulary in order to facilitate and deepen students' vocabulary development. This process is a systematic and engaging series of steps which provides students with a deeper understanding, not only of the word meaning, but also of the multiple contexts in which to use the word. An abundance of research has validated this instructional approach as beneficial for all students, including students with reading challenges. The efficacy of explicit vocabulary instruction is included as a suggested practice in the IES Practice Guide, Improving Adolescent Literacy from Works Clearinghouse. A final key point Archer emphasizes is that this evidence-based practice must be implemented in all grades and all content areas for students to learn and close their vocabulary gaps. The research is speaking loud and clear on what will improve adolescents' literacy skills. The practices that are included in our daily instruction to truly understand word meaning and use require more than looking up definitions in a dictionary and writing sentences containing the word. Graves, back in 2000, shared 4 components research showed were most effective in any vocabulary program. The 4 components listed in the slide recommends independent reading to expose students to background knowledge and new words, and provide explicit instruction for unfamiliar words central to the text's meaning. It is important that teachers explicitly teach strategies so they are able to figure out word meanings independently. Last, Graves Graves promotes manipulating and playing with words and word meanings as an engagement technique throughout instruction. Graves' research also has implications for reviewing vocabulary programs used within the district, as well as reflecting on our own instructional practice.
As we discussed in the previous slides, Michael Graves' research identified 4 components or necessary parts of an effective vocabulary program, and the IES Practice Guide for Adolescent Literacy from Works Clearinghouse reiterated many of Graves' thoughts. The guide states that the level of evidence supporting explicit vocabulary instruction is very strong when working with adolescent learners, and all teachers need to provide it. The IES Practice Guide gives overarching recommendations to consider for instruction, which are listed on this slide. Future webinars in this series will delve deeper into Anita Archer's specific steps and procedures to implement explicit vocabulary instruction, so stay tuned. Now stop the video for a quick activity to look at the 4 recommendations on this slide. To activate your thinking about your vocabulary instruction, which of these do you either always, sometimes, or have not yet incorporated? Which recommendation might be a good place to start with planfully including explicit vocabulary instruction into lessons? Please restart the video when you are finished reflecting and discussing. You have just thought about the IES Practice Guide's overarching recommendations for instruction in light of your practices. And now we will get a little more detailed. This is your opportunity to reflect on your actual current approach or program for vocabulary instruction. You will be thinking about the alignment of Graves' 4 recommended components that we discussed earlier, which are listed on this slide. We invite you to use the document provided in the link at the bottom of the page and also on the resource document to reflect on and discuss your current vocabulary instructional approach. The link is to a Google Doc, which will direct you to make a copy that you can use and share. Please return to the webinar after the activity to hear about resources.
We highly recommend the following resources for digging deeper with your learning. The titles have been linked to give you access. The IES Practice Guide is a free resource that contains a summary of the evidence on providing explicit vocabulary instruction and how to carry out the recommendations. It's a must-read. The Knowledge Gap gives it a historical perspective of the failure of America's educational system to systematically build students' knowledge and close learning gaps.
Today's webinar focused on the importance of understanding the vocabulary gaps that exist for our students and being intentional in order to meet their needs through explicit vocabulary instruction. We reviewed components recommended by research and reflected on our classroom practice or program used with students. You will want to hold on to your work as we will be building on our knowledge and skill with explicit vocabulary instruction throughout our webinar series.
We know you have many choices for professional development and you chose to join us on this webinar. Please contact us if you have any questions about any of the content. We look forward to continuing our dive in the adolescent literacy with the 4th webinar in our series, Vocabulary Instruction Before, During, and After. See you then.